Yes, so it has started recording now. Started recording, Shailendra. So now, without much ado, I give it to you.
Okay. Thank you, Aishwarya, and good evening to all of you. At the outset, I first want to thank all of you for joining in because I believe that time is one resource which you cannot trade at any cost. So the very fact that you have chosen to spend this time on this session, I think I'm very grateful. I'm also very grateful to Aishwarya particularly for encouraging me to be on this webinar. I have been on previous CTT webinars and I realized that most of the speakers were experts in those fields. Whereas I have chosen to speak on the topic of relevance of Gita in the context of coaching. And neither I am an expert on Gita nor I am an expert on coaching. So just to get this opportunity, I am very grateful. I want to start with a quotation from Socrates. So that's surprising. I'm talking of Gita, but Socrates comes to mind. He said that to know is to know that you know nothing. Okay, so that's what he believed. And I find that very interesting in this context because with so much of passage of time reading the Gita, I still feel that I'm learning. So what I'll do is quickly for those, I would assume that most of you have heard about Gita or known about it, but I'll just give a quick introduction to what Gita is. So we are talking about Bhagavad Gita, which was essentially written many years back. It's written in Sanskrit and it has about 700 verses. And it is written in form of a dialogue between primarily two characters. One is Arjun and one is Krishna. So that is what the book is about. And in terms of what the book talks about, I would say it is like the art and science of life. So essentially, all of us primarily are born into this earth. We are going to live this life, and if you believe in rebirth, then we are going to live multiple lives. So I think it's important for all of us to know what is the right way or a good way for us to live this life. So with that introduction, one, I also would like to say that I'm going to speak in English. The textbook is in Sanskrit. So as we all know, in the coaching paradigm, the vocabulary is very important, and I'm going to use English words for a text that is written in Sanskrit. So you'll have to pardon me if the interpretation changes because of the language. But I guess as all coaches, we understand that. So one advantage I find in this forum is that all of us are coaches, and therefore I think that I'm going to do this session in the same format where I'm you can say the coachee, and all of you are coaches, and you're welcome to ask questions at any point. And I think your questions will help me move forward. So without much ado, let me come to some of the principal concepts behind what the Gita talks about. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because some of that vocabulary is important for us to capture first before we can connect it with coaching or, for that matter, anything else. So the vocabulary of Gita is, to start with, we have to understand that it talks about something called the soul. So the belief is that there is a soul which is residing within each one of us, and therefore, when we say, when we introduce ourselves, for example, I might say that I am Shailendra Jha, but actually the right way to say is my name is Shailendra Jha. And if you understand the distinction between these two lines, saying I am Shailendra versus my name is Shailendra, I think that the essence gets captured, which means the soul is the real entity. The soul is the changeless entity, and everything around it, the body, the mind, the intellect, that is the changing entity. Okay, so basically we are kind of a union between something which is changeless and something which is changing. And the other aspect important to grasp is that each one of us is a soul encased within, like I said, within a body, mind, and intellect. And we are interacting with each other. So we are interacting with each other. We are interacting with any other animate or living beings like plants, animals, etc. And each of them has a soul again. Now, what is happening is in this physical world, when we are interacting through our sense organs primarily. So, for example, we see, we hear, we touch, and these are the sense organs are the way to contact the world. Okay. Now, the other concept very important is what is called as the world as we know it, the physical world, where we all reside. And the important aspect about that, as compared to what I talked about, the soul, is that the physical world is ever changing. So the soul is never changing, and the physical world is ever changing, which means that everything begins and everything ends. And therefore, there's this endless cycle of birth and death, whether you are talking about a person, whether you talk about plants, animals, or you talk about any event also, any activity also, it has a finite beginning and a finite end. So at this point, you might say, okay, so what, right? I mean, yeah, if this is what it is, yeah, what's the issue? The issue is that, see, if you are constantly interacting with the world, which you have to, because activity is inevitable, then you must be going through at various experiences when you interact. That experience can sometimes be painful, that can be pleasurable. So you alternate between pain and pleasure. You get something that you like, you get something that you don't like. And at the core, each one of us I would like to believe that each one of us wants to be happy. We want to be happy all the time. So we don't want to go through this alternate cycles of happiness, unhappiness, pain, pleasure, and so on. But the nature of the beast, like they say, is that this cycle is inevitable, meaning the fact that you are acting in this world, you will experience these what they call as opposites or dualities. So therefore, one is to accept that as a reality, saying that yes, I will go through, or at least my body, mind, and intellect will go through different experiences, and that is something that is the reality. But the good part is that the soul doesn't get touched by this. Okay, so the soul remains as it is, and it doesn't get touched by any of these experiences. So that, having said that, I think the important aspect then is, okay, so if I'm engaging in this world, for example, if you take an example of being a coach, you are engaging with the coachee. Okay, if you are in a professional career, you are engaging in the organization with different individuals, customers, employees, and so on. And in your personal life also, you are engaging with friends and family. So so the question is, okay, so what would give us the maximum happiness, pleasure, bliss, and what would give us permanent happiness? That's the main question, because you don't want to get buffeted by these cycles of pain and pleasure and so on. So there the answer from Gita is that there are several things that you can do about it. The good news is you can do something about it. Okay, that's the good news. The other part of it is that The only thing you can do about it is act on it in terms of your thoughts, in your actions. But what you do not have a control over, or at least not a full control over, is the outcome. So basically, you can't control the fruits of your actions, but you can definitely control what the actions that you will take or the thoughts that you will think. Okay, so that's a very empowering concept that every one of us has the potential to work on this, work on your thoughts, work on your actions. So then, the question arises that if that is the case, why do we sometimes struggle, right? Why do we struggle sometimes to do what is right or think what is right? What's the tussle about? So there, I would like to introduce one more concept, and I want to definitely inform you that this is a topic which cannot be covered in 1 hour. It cannot be covered. Maybe it can be covered in a lifetime, but I'm trying my best. So, so the fact that I wanted to share was that if it is so obvious that doing the right thing, thinking the right thing is the answer, what comes in the way? What is the bottleneck? And there is a very interesting concept that Gita brings about, is that we all, when we are born with a certain set of characteristics. Okay, so our body, our mind, our intellect, we carry certain characteristics from the previous births. Okay, so as I said, the soul never dies, the body dies. It's almost like the soul decides that, okay, I have worn this body for a long time, just like, I'm going to change this t-shirt someday, so I'm going to change the t-shirt and wear a different one. Similarly, the body is taken off and the new body is gotten into by the soul. But what carries forward from previous births, as a concept Gita says, is the gunas, or the attributes that are carried from the previous birth, which means those attributes are coming based on the actions that you had taken in the past life, and you are born with that. Now, when you say that you are born with that, that means there is a certain element of behavior that you would exhibit because of those past impressions, let's call it this way. And they could be of 3 different varieties, as they are called. So you could exhibit certain behaviors or thoughts which are more, let's say, aligned to the truth. They're more harmonious. They make you and others around you blissful, happy, peaceful. Then there could be a second variety where you exhibit certain behaviors which possibly are driven by your desires, your passions, like you want to achieve something. Now, in that process, there is a possibility that that particular behavior may or may not be beneficial to everybody else. And possibly in the longer run, it may not also be beneficial to yourself. And then the third category, which is completely negated by Gita, meaning it is not suggested at all, which is a behavior of inactivity. So Gita very strongly says that, one is you do the right thing or think the right thing. That is the best thing. If you for some reason struggle with that, at the very least, you should act. So action is paramount. And the worst case is where you don't act at all. And that is literally kind of wasting your life. So if I have to act, and if I have to act more and more in the way that brings peace and harmony and blissfulness to me, myself and others, what are things that I can do about it, right? What are the practical aspects? So let's come to the practice now. So we have covered some theory. So what can each one of us do? So there are some suggested things that Gita talks about. And they use a lot of good analogies. So that's the part I love the most. So I'll cover some of them. So one of the metaphors or analogies, I don't know what the right word would be in this case, but let's say, for example, you are trying to control your actions. Okay, you are trying to control your passions or desires so that you can act in the right way. One of the suggested methods is withdraw yourself for some time, if possible every day, or possibly every few days. You withdraw yourself. What does that mean? So the example given is that, if you look at a tortoise, it withdraws its limbs from time to time. It goes into its shell, and that gives some resting time, some peaceful time for your senses to withdraw. Because if you're engaged continually in the world, then you get, like I said, you alternate between pain, happiness, and all the opposites of life. So you take some time out, you withdraw, and you and possibly you could meditate. So meditation is highly recommended. Pranayam is recommended. And so proper breathing techniques is recommended. And if you can take some time out, then that kind of acts like a detox for your body, mind, intellect. So you come back refreshed and renewed. So that is one. The other suggestion is that when you are engaged in some activity, do it with a little detachment. What do you mean by detachment is that while you are doing the activity, you do it intensely, but don't get over engaged in the result. Don't get too anxious of the result. And that we see in our day-to-day life also. Like even in cricket, for example, if you're playing the World Cup and if you're always thinking about, how do I win the World Cup? I don't think you're likely to win it. You have to play a ball at a time. So that is the kind of example I would take. So the suggested is do actions with detachment towards the result, which sometimes could get misinterpreted, saying that, okay, so if I don't even worry about the results, then why am I doing something, right? So that is not the suggestion that you will not enjoy the result or you will not get the result. Rather, it's the other way around. Everything you do will have a result. That is guaranteed. Okay, that's a 100% guaranteed thing. That if you do any action, if you think anything at all times, there will be an outcome. Okay, but the suggestion is that if you could not get too attached to the outcome while you are performing the action, then I think you will be able to perform it much effectively. That's the suggestion, right? So why will everything have a effect? That is what they call as the law of karma, right? Everything that you do will have an effect. If you throw a pebble in the pond, there will be a ripple. Okay, there's bound to be. Okay, so those are examples where you cannot escape from the consequences. That is a very important thing. Okay, so what basically it means is that everything you are doing is going to have a consequence now or sometime later, or maybe in the next life. Now, if you accept that, which means that you have to be aware, that more aware than may possibly we are today about what we are doing, because you are trading your future for it, right? So if you are more and more aware, chances are that you will more and more move towards the right actions, the right thoughts, etc., which will benefit us as well as the others around us. So at this point, maybe I can pause for a minute and see if there are any questions, because what I'll do next is try and now get into our world of coaching and see, are there any parallels between what I just talked about and the coaching world?
Thank you, Shailendra, for these concepts on Gita. We've been hearing them since quite some time, basically right from our childhood. We really don't understand these concepts, right?
Yeah.
So is there anybody who wants to ask any question at this point? Okay, so then I have a question for you, Shailendra.
Sure.
So you mentioned that we do experience, and soul doesn't get touched by any of the experiences, whereas the body does, right? At the same time, we talk of the cycle of karma, right? Wherein whatever you do whether it is this life or the previous life, your karmas get taken over. So isn't this a little contradictory to each other, these two statements?
Right. So, yeah. So, thanks, Ashwarya. I think that's an important question. Like I said, there is a concept behind this also, which I should explain. What Gita talks about is that when the soul decides to leave the body, like I said, like changing the garment, the soul decides to leave the body. The impressions or the karma gets carried from one life to another. And the example given is, it is like, when a wind is blowing through a garden, right, and there are flowers in that garden. What the wind does is it kind of captures the scent of it, right? It captures the scent of the flowers and moves on, right? So that is the example given, and that is how the soul carries forward the what is called as the karmic residue from the previous birth, which means that when you are born, you already are carrying something with you, that karmic load, or what you call it. Now, the thing is that, so that's where I said the empowering thought is that, yes, for example, let's say I was born with a lot of desires from my previous lives. But can I do something about it? And that's what they say, that you can change that karmic load. So I'm now a little bit getting into arithmetic here. What you could do is, if you do more and more activities that are beneficial for yourself and others, then that will improve the load. And on the other hand, if you indulge in too many activities which are driven by passion, which may not be beneficial for you and others, then you can also subtract from that. So basically, you can either add positive or you can go more negative, and then you will again reach a score at the end of your current life. Okay. So idea is, use the current life to improve the score. Okay. And that is a very positive thing, because there is hope for everybody here. People would say, okay, I'm let's say somebody ends up doing an act like, for example, there are lots of people who end up committing a heinous act like a murder, right? Now, is there any hope for them in Gita? The answer is yes, provided they recognize that and start working towards erasing that karmic taint. Okay. So it's almost like, there is a kind of, there is a hope that you can revert back to that original state that you came from, but you have to work towards it. So the key message here is, act on it. Okay. You have to act, and you have to know what to act upon and how to act upon it. So that is the key message from here. Does that answer you in some way?
Yeah. Thanks, Shalind.
Yeah, I have a question. So I just wrote it down there. Now you're talking about the past life and the impact of it in the current. And for me, the current is the known life, right? So I don't know what happened in the past. And so then how do you know what is the corrective action or positive or negative action that I need to take now for something which has happened in the past, which I have no control on? And how do I even know what I need to do? Whether there was something negative done and it's being carried forward here. So how do I get to know the impact of it and the effect of it? And then how do I then try and counter it by doing something positive or adding on to the account in a positive way? But how do I first create awareness of what's in the account already as it exists? Or we just kind of surrender to what there is and say, okay, it's not in my control, so I can just surrender to it and move on. So how do you kind of help understand that and then work towards it?
Sure, Anuradha, and I think that's a very, very nice question. So I'll answer it in a couple of parts. One is, can you do something about what has already happened? The answer, at least in my understanding, seems to be no. You can't change what has happened. You can't change. Okay, so there is something that you have brought forward. It's like an account that has brought forward from from past, and that is true even in current life. So maybe just for for this discussion, if I stick to the current life itself, for a moment, even in your current life, you cannot erase the effect or consequences what has already happened, the actions or the thoughts that you have taken. However, like I said, the empowering part is that you can always try and do things going forward. And what can you do? So like I said, a couple of things that help in that journey is that you get more aligned with your true nature. So let me explain what I mean. See, at the core, we are the soul. Okay, so that is the primary thing. The soul is a changeless entity. It is a pure entity. It is not tainted by any past or present karma. And therefore, what you do is you work more in alignment with the soul. Okay, which means that you are less and less aligned. So the grossest alignment you can make is with your body. Okay, if you do everything only with your body, and you're looking only to satisfy the passions or the desires of the body, that is, you can say, at one scale, that is the gross part of it. And then comes the mind, then comes the intellect, and then comes the soul. So in terms of very practically, if you could reflect on the actions and see, what is the quality of that action. Okay. Now the most, so the most appropriate action, as they describe, is something which is unselfish. Unselfish doesn't mean that it should not benefit you, but unselfish means that your intent is right, meaning, the intention behind the action is right. For example, even in the Gita, when Arjun is required to kill somebody, if he is killing for the right reason, then it is considered as the right action. So it is more than the action, it is the intent that you have behind it. And that should be pure, that should be unselfish. Second is that when you are performing the action, if you can be in a more detached manner, like I said, you are not overly concerned about the fruits of that action, but you are concerned about the purity of the action itself. Third is that when you receive the result, if you can be more even-minded in terms of pain or pleasure or victory or defeat, then that is another way to proceed on this path. Now, having said all this, let's be very practical again. In a day-to-day situation, you will end up doing things in different ways, and you could also end up doing things to satisfy your own personal ambitions, desires, passions. But what is prescribed in the Gita is that any effort that you put in the right direction has a result. Okay, so nothing goes waste. So even if for a minute in a day you could do it in the right way, you're still benefited. Okay, so there is no loss here. There's only progress, and the progress is at the pace that you can carry. Okay, so everybody has a different pace of progress. That's why, at the eventual result would be that, your karmic load is completely, made zero, and you merge with the soul. That's what Paul as the ultimate thing. But it could take a different time for anybody, and there's nothing wrong or right about it. So one good thing about this whole paradigm is that you can progress at your own pace. Yes, you have to be aware that if you're progressing at a slower pace, it will take longer. But there are no prescriptions in terms of doing everything in a single day. So you can progress slowly. Like take meditation, for example. You can progress slowly on that path. Take this detachment, for example, or unselfishness, for example, or any of those attributes that are talked about. You don't have to achieve it in a day. And even if you do it partially, you still get credit for it. So it's a beautiful system. You always get credit for what you do. Yeah, and also get discredit for what you don't do. So I think it's a fair system. That's what it is. Anuradha, did I clarify?
Yes, thanks so much. I think to a very large extent. So what I'm taking away is for the current life, since what are the actions. So there's awareness of the actions, good or bad, that you've done, and then you can probably be more reflective about them and take corrective action or positive action around those. My question really was about the past account, which, how do you create awareness of what is there in the past account, and if there were negatives in that, how do you know that there are negatives, and how do you then start working on it? So you know, or if there were positives, and how do you kind of try and add more to it? So how do you create awareness of what's already is there, which you would not be aware of?
Sure, Anuradha. So I'll give a very short answer to it because I'm aware of the time. But I think to your question of how you become aware of yourself, or for that matter anybody else, is that your behavior, your actions, and your thoughts give away. Okay, basically, what you are born with, that tends to exhibit itself, that tends to manifest. So for example, knowing this will make us more tolerant of others, right? Like when we see somebody behaving in a certain way, we will understand that that is coming from some previous actions or thoughts that person has taken. So you can be more understanding of other people, you can be more understanding of yourself. And I think it's very important because sometimes we are very harsh on ourselves. We punish ourselves. Why am I thinking negatively? Why am I thinking of harming somebody and all that, right? Instead of being critical about yourself or others, this knowledge helps you understand that okay, it's coming from somewhere. Okay, we don't know what actions led to this, but we know that something led to this, and we have to fix it. And we have to fix it for ourselves, and we can help fix it for others. And that is where this coaching thing comes, right? I mean, as a ultimate objective, if a coach could help the coachee connect with his true nature, I think if the coach could help the coachee understand who he really is, okay, and how powerful he is, what potential he carries, and it's literally infinite, as described in the Gita. If you are united with your soul, which is described as pure, unchangeable, unblemished, it's the perfect, it's perfection. Okay, so the more you come closer to your soul, the more times you connect with your soul, better you get at whatever you want to do. And that is what I would say the coachee wants. That's what I guess the coach also wants, right? We all want to move, right? We talk about movement. Has the coachee moved? Has there been any movement? Has there been any learning? Has there been any so practicing this, I think, helps the coach and also, like I said, the coachee. So just want to check, Anuradha. I mean, I gave a very short answer, but I think did you get some hint?
Yes, I did. Yeah. So I guess it again goes back to the karma theory of Gita, that you need to act and act in the as positive manner as possible, so that not only do you add to it, right? So not getting into too many details of the past, if you kind of remain in the current, in the present moment, you would be able to act positively around it. So yes, thanks for that.
And from a coaching paradigm also, if I connect, one thing which is very clear is which Rajat and Arvind taught us in the class, was that primarily you have to be non-judgmental. You have to be more accepting, okay, when you're listening to the coachee. And that comes from the fact that we know where it is coming from now, right? So there is no point in being judgmental about it. It is only the movement that you care about. Okay, you are supporting the coachee in movement. You are not judging him. Neither you are judging yourself. And it's a very beautiful thing, because then you become more effective. If you can be a witness, if you can be witness to the movement that the coachee is making, and that is the game even they suggest in life, that, if you can truly be the soul at all times, and you're witnessing your body, you understand what your body is doing, your mind is doing, intellect is doing, and you're watching it, then that's the most empowering thing. If you're getting caught up in it, if you're getting caught up in emotions and desires and things like that, then nothing would happen to you, but you will go through those alternate cycles of happiness, pleasure, victory, defeat, because the principal concept is that within happiness itself there is a seed of unhappiness. That's a concept which also belongs from Gita and other texts. That it sounds paradoxical, but the very fact that you are saying I'm happy has the seeds of unhappiness. So basically what they say is that the body, mind, intellect can only be relatively happy. If you want to be happy all the time, if you want to be perennially happy, blissful, peaceful, then that is only when you unite with the soul. Okay, at the body, mind, intellect level, you have to oscillate. Now, somebody may say, okay, so what is the harm? I love this oscillation, but yeah, you get tired of it also, right? You get tired. You get also fearful. Let's say you get something beautiful in life, you start fearing that I will lose this, and you will lose it. Okay, it's inevitable. You are going to lose it because it had a beginning, so it will have an end. Let's say you did not get something, then you will keep desiring it. You will keep waiting for it, and you will not enjoy your moment because you are waiting for something in future, which may come, may not come, right? So this is a very practical advice that if you either live in fear or live in greed, you're never living actually, because you're always scared. What I have will go away. What I don't have may not come to me. But the very fact is that, it is going to change. And so the beauty of this whole thing is if you can embrace change, okay, and which is something that even a coachee needs to do, and the coach needs to encourage that, you embrace change. Don't be fearful of change because it's inevitable. The only thing you can do is nudge it a little bit towards the positive. You can nudge it through your actions, through your behaviors. But if you say that I'm afraid, I don't want to change anything, then that is a risk, because it will anyways change whether you want it or not. So you might as well participate. Why you are a participant in this journey, or rather you are the traveler. So you might as well take control. So Aishwarya, I don't know how we're doing with time. I think
we still have 15 minutes, more than almost 20 minutes. We can still go on for 20 minutes. So you can continue.
Sure. So I'll see if I So please interrupt me, because I would love to get more questions. But I'll still carry on, because I feel that there are some very lovely examples that I wanted to share.
Sure.
One example given in the Gita is that if you can live like a lotus. Okay, what does the lotus do? It lives in the mud. It lives in the dirt. But it always remains clean. You don't see a dirty lotus, right? So that is one example given. How can you keep yourself immune from the effects of what is happening around you? Okay, that is one. The second example given is, can you be like a duck in water? So what does a duck do? So duck is in the water, and then when you can't avoid participating in this world, okay? But let's say you participated in a forum where there was a lot of anger, there's a lot of negative emotions. Then like out of that meeting, just maybe shake yourself and just get rid of all that, right? So you have to emotionally cleanse yourself. You have to cleanse your body, you have to cleanse your mind, you have to cleanse your intellect, because you can't avoid the impressions. There will be impressions of the outside world on you, whether you want it or not. Okay, so the duck example is there. The tortoise example I gave. The other example given is that of horses. Okay, so the senses are compared to horses. Each of your senses as a horse, you don't control it, it will run amok. Okay, it will go towards your desires. Okay, and then the unfortunate part is that the desires will never get satiated. Okay, that is one very strange thing, that you think that, okay, if I get this, I have a lot of friends when we share with each other, saying that how much money is enough in life. It's never enough. Okay, I mean, you can go on like that for everything. Okay, how many cars would you like? Maybe 2. Okay, what about the third one? Yeah, it would help. I think it will help. Yeah. So desires are insatiable, and therefore these senses go towards them. They get attracted to them. If you don't rein in them, if you don't tell your body that you've had a drink, that's enough. You don't have to go for the second one. If you're not telling yourself anything, then that is like a horse which is run amok. So keep your horses in control. So that is one example I'll give one. So yeah, I mean, then so it's not a dry text. Let me tell you, it's not a very dry text. But a lot depends on the people who read it. One is going by the literal meaning of it. Okay. But you have to go beyond that. You have to think about it for a while and then reflect on it. Another comparison I want to draw between our world of coaching and the Gita is that, see, in the coaching world, we are all coaches. We could also be coachees. So there are two of us, the coach and the coachee. If you look at Gita, Gita is also a coach. Okay, it may not be a living coach in that sense, but each of the verse is like a trigger. So instead of asking questions, you could read a verse. So the verse is the question in this case. Okay, the verse, what it does is it kind of takes you inside yourself. It makes you think. Just like when the coach asks a question to the coachee, the coachee gets thinking. In fact, what Rajat told us is that if you can get somebody to think, then yeah, you are succeeding in coaching. That's what I learned. So if a verse can make me think, and typically we say question should not be more than 8 or 9 words. A verse is also 8 or 9 words. So it kind of fits in very perfectly. So if you could not get a coach like Rajat or Arvind or Aishwarya or somebody to coach you, then yeah, you can fall back to the Gita and take up one verse and then reflect on it, and see what you can get out of it. So that's so Gita is also a coach, yeah, in that sense. Yeah.
What a wonderful thought, Shailendra. So wonderful. Gita is a coach. It's
yeah.
Anybody have any questions for Shailendra? Anybody would like to?
Is there something on the chat, Aishwarya? I see something.
No, I can't see anything, and you can see.
Okay. Anuradha, okay, maybe that's I didn't notice it earlier. Anuradha, yeah, so I guess you have the answer. Yeah, I always prefer extempore. Yeah, so yeah. See the beauty and the difficulty of this topic is that you can never build enough slides. And the other side is you don't need slides. And that's the beauty of this whole Gita, that, if you want it, you can get it in half a second. If you didn't want it, you could, keep reading it forever. Both ways, it works both ways. It's more about, I think Gita is more about seeing all the possibilities. Like in the coaching world, right? We encourage coachee to look at possibilities, right? We we are always optimistic. We are positive that yes, something can be done, right? The Kochi can do something or can think something. So Gita is like that, right? I mean, it has immense possibilities because it encourages you to be close to the soul. That is why there is a word called yoga used very often. Yoga is not the physical yoga only that we all practice day to day, right? Those asanas and everything. Yoga is literally means union. Okay, so it is a union between your body, mind, intellect, and your soul. And eventually, I'll kind of probably wind up with this concept, which you may choose to agree or not, but it's a concept again stated that the soul is nothing but coming from the supreme soul. Or for those who believe in God, it is coming from God. Okay, so God is the one who created, and eventually, you merge into the same God. Okay, so it's like example given is like if there's an ocean and we are like a drop of water or we are like a bubble in that ocean. The bubble has no independent existence. Like, I mean, it's part of the ocean. Okay, so in some ways we are all same. We appear different. Like, I look different from you only because of the body, mind, and intellect. But my soul and your soul and everybody's soul is the same because the source is the same, right? So we have a common father or mother, whichever you prefer, which is that soul. But I don't want to harp too much on it because I'm aware that not all of us may sign up to the existence of God. So, for those who do, that is the final destination when you merge with your creator. Okay, that's where eventually we need to land up. But that's a journey that we are on, and it can happen in this lifetime. It may happen in another 10, 20, 100 lifetimes. So we don't know, and that's the beauty. Yeah, that's the beauty.
Shailendra, I have a question here. This is Rekha here. When you talk about the detachment aspect, right? How do we really create that analogy in a coaching conversation? Can you help us understand a bit deeper nuance of that aspect when you're talking about it?
Sure, Rekha. So I'll attempt that. So when I say detached, see, one of the things, for example, if you see the coaching guidelines, one of the things that is mentioned is that when you make observations to the coachee about what you think he is feeling or she is feeling, right? If you can make that observation without being very attached to whether it is right or not, that's something that again I learned in the class, saying that let's say if I'm observing that, Rekha, I think, at this point you look a bit, nervous. Let's say if that is my observation, but I have no attachment to that observation. If you say no, Shailendra, I think your observation is not correct, I accept it immediately, right? So which means that I am not overly attached to whatever I am, whatever is the outcome of my thought or action, right? For example, if I take, cricket is my favorite, so, pardon me for that, but I read somewhere that Sachin Tendulkar, when he used to go to bat in a stadium which is 100,000 people screaming at him, especially if he's batting in India, right? He is not thinking about the runs that he's going to make. He's not thinking about it. He's not thinking about the adulation that people are doing for him, that shouting Sachin, all. So what is he looking at, right? So I thought he'll say that, I'm looking at the bowler because that's where the bowler is going to bowl at him, right? No, he's not looking at the bowler also. So what is he looking at? He's looking at the ball. That's the only thing that he's looking at, right? So he's completely detached at that point from the outcome. He's just in the process. He's in the zone, as they call it, right? If you can be in the zone most of the time, and which is true for the coach and the coachee, because we talk about presence, right? We talk about presence, right? I have to be present for the coachee. In fact, Arvind is not on this, but every time I show him my recording, he says, were you there for your coachee, right? I mean, were you 100% there for your coachee, right? So physically I was, but something tells him that maybe I was not there for some part of the time. Maybe I was thinking about myself or something like that. Similarly, if the coachee wants to make progress on whatever he has chosen as the topic of the day, or he wants to achieve that measures of success, etc., then again he has to be focused on that, right? So basically, it's like for example, if as a coach you start worrying about, so there's another question which I faced in the class, saying that if I'm a coach and for example the coachee says I spent 1 hour with you but I made no movement. Rajat said that that's not your problem. So you don't have to be overly concerned about the result, right? You are concerned about the process. It will happen. And same thing with Geeta, right? So the one example, that last example, again, I keep saying last, but one more thing that Geeta says is that sometimes, we do effort and we don't see the result, right? So how do you explain that? So the example given is that you take a chisel and a mallet and you keep hitting something, right? A stone. Now, every time you are hitting the stone, there is some impact happening, but you are not seeing it. But maybe the 1000th time that you hit it, it will break. That's when the result will come. So it is happening, but you are not seeing it. So the very fact that you are not seeing something doesn't mean that it's not happening. It's happening, right? So maybe I diverted from the question, but I thought I don't want to miss the opportunity to share what I have learned, and so I thought this example will also help.
Sure. So what I really understand from this detachment aspect is that I definitely knew you would come to that coaching presence point for sure. But for me, what I take it as, what can we really do as coaches to expand our presence in terms of create an expansive presence for us?
Yeah.
I
agree, Rekha, and I think as a coach, I don't know, you all can share your opinion, but as a coach, you have to keep working on yourself. If you want to support your client or coachee, you have to keep working on self, because somewhere it will reflect. See, what is inside comes outside. If I remember going to somebody else, not coaching, but in a parallel example, somebody who does counseling, and I found her to be a very troubled person. I don't think she can help me, because so as a coach, you have to work on yourself and bring that level of what do you get, peace or bliss or whatever, which the coachee can take from. So I think it gets shared. Even if you don't say everything, I think lot is said from the presence. You can communicate a lot without saying anything.
Yeah, and that goes back to what Carl Rogers says: being non-judgmental and still having that unconditional positive regard for your client.
Yes. I think truth is said in many different ways. I think truth is truth, but like we all know, vocabularies are different. And that's why that's one big lesson I have learned in this coaching thing, that everybody may use the same word but may mean differently. So that's one learning I have got. Sorry, Aishwarya, you were saying something.
No, I was just telling you, thank you for this wonderful insight. And Rupa is complimenting you, saying that she doesn't have any questions, but very happy to hear whatever you have to say. Yeah?
Thank you, Rupa. Thanks for your time. Yeah.
And so is Alka. She is also complimenting you and saying that, agreeing with you, saying that we need to consistently work on ourselves.
Yeah.
So very well said. In the interest of the time, Shailendra, I would like to thank you for this wonderful insight. I personally gained a lot, because I've never read Geeta from this perspective. And going forward, when I read Geeta, I will definitely try associating it with coaching, because it's a very different perspective to Geeta altogether. So thank you so much. And any final thoughts that you would like to share? Any parting thoughts?
No, I just want to thank each one of you. As I said in the beginning, I feel it's a great honor to get this forum, and starting with Aishwarya and everybody else on the call, and everybody in the CTT family. I want to thank all of you.
Great. So thank you all very much for joining in the webinar today, and have a great evening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.